Great. So it looks like we're ready to get started. Thank you all again so much for joining. If you have questions while we go through this webinar, please type them into the questions box that's on your screen. Today, Dennis Sullivan and Brent Cammett will be discussing what you need to know about security plans. So with that being said, Brent, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane. As Jane said, my name is Brent Cammett. I'm with a company called P3 Propane Safety. I've been in the industry of the propane and oil industry for, I'm scared to admit, but it's like just over 30 years now. So as we go through this, you have the ability to ask questions. So please, in the chat section, if you have a question about anything we discussed, don't hesitate, and we'll discuss those at the end. Now I'll let Dennis introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sullivan with PitStop Fuels. I'm in Gorham, Maine. As well, been in the industry quite a while. I'd rather not say how long, but just here to offer some, boots on the ground insight how we deal with security plans.
So today we're going to talk about what you need to know about DOT security plans. DOT security plans, for whatever reason, we've seen a very big uptick in DOT audits this year and last year. So, and of course, I'm sure it's revenue driven, but they're showing up to your facilities. They are generally handing out a list of items that they would like to look at. And what we've been hearing is that they're saying we'll be back in 48 hours and we'd like to see all that documentation that they requested. One of those items, or one of the first of those items, is that DOT security plan. If you're not familiar, that DOT security plan speaks to the individual security measures that your facility and employees adhere to. The requirement is in CFR 49, or the Code of Federal Regulation. To be exact, it's in 172.800. It goes into a security awareness training, in-depth security, and any relevant training to address those security risks related to that transportation of hazardous materials. And if you're wondering whether or not you qualify, well, the mandate is right here. It's going to be required for any large bulk quantities greater than 6,614 pounds. That would be for any solids such as dynamite or a hazardous material that was a powder, etc. And 792 gallons for any liquids or gases in a single packaging, such as a cargo tank. So of course, in the propane industry or oil industry, your propane and oil trucks all are going to fall into that criteria. So it's imperative that you have this document in place. It's also imperative that you discuss all this stuff with your employees. And what you would discuss with them or train them on would be whatever your individual security measures are. And the document would outline, things such as, what do you do with the bobtails after hours? Are they behind a locked gate? What do you do with the keys to them? Is there camera monitoring systems? Do you have computer password protection? Is it a well-lit area? Et cetera, et cetera. It's going to go into all of those different things that relates to the individual security of your facility. And I know this probably sounds crazy, but in my career, I've actually had attempted bobtail theft twice. I think that's a very high number. Once was 20-something years ago. There was a teenager that decided to steal a bobtail because he was tired of walking. Thankfully, he was unsuccessful, and we were able to stop that. But in that case, the keys were left in the cab of the bobtail. Beautiful summer day, the window was down, and thankfully he didn't get very far. He stalled the truck and we were able to apprehend him, and it didn't go any further. Another incident that I had happen to me was probably only about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was after hours. The police were chasing an individual, and to get away from them, he ended up jumping over a 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire around it and ended up breaking into the bobtails. And we knew this because the next day when we showed up for work, there was blood all over the inside of the bobtails. The individual had tried to hotwire them, ripping out some of the wires, costing us a lot of money in repairs. So you just never know what's going to happen. In that case, that individual was going to get that truck started and run through a locked gate and do God only knows what with that vehicle. So we can never be too careful. The threat level in our country obviously has a lot to do with this. Our trucks can be used as a weapon of mass destruction. So what we're going to do is we're going to train our employees on that general awareness, the familiarization, function-specific training to their exact tasks, safety training, emergency response information, security awareness, in-depth security training, 90 days after employment or anytime a job function changes is when you have to train your employees to this standard. And then recurrent training is every 3 years. You can do this in-house, or you can hire an outside third party to do this training. And then, of course, you want to keep those records on file in your organization, as well as the employee should keep those all that information, as they would their driver's license or anything else, their med card. They're going to maintain that information, have a wallet card, as well as training in their employee training file. And then, excuse me, then the next slide, please, Jane. Oh, I didn't realize we were over already. So anyway, it speaks to all those different levels of security that I mentioned. So you're going to have to outline that for your business to find out what it is. Your trucks do not have to be locked behind a locked gate or fence. However, you do have to have whatever that security measure is for your individual facility. So if you park them in a well-lit lot with camera monitoring systems, and you lock up the vehicles and place the keys inside a lockbox inside a locked building, then you would identify all that in that particular security plan for your facility, and you would have those individuals trained to that specific, so they knew what to do. I always say that your employees need to speak the same language, so it's imperative that if DOT comes in and audits your facility, starts talking to your employees and asks them these questions around your security, well, it has to be that they all understand what to do. And of course, they hopefully will, reiterate exactly how they were trained to those DOT officials. The same would be true on any OSHA scale. If there was an OSHA level of something that you wanted to adhere to, we would also have that same thing. Again, employees have to speak the same language. Dennis, did you want to tell us how what you do on your end as far as it pertains to a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, sure. So, many of the requirements, or actually all the requirements you just talked about, Brent, we employ all of those here. And it starts with when we're screening applicants to join the team. We do all that with the background checks and whatnot, and it carries on through every step of their onboarding and their initial on-the-job training. We cover all that general awareness, the function specific, basically every bullet point you had in your slide. And then, furthermore, we continue that with the reoccurring training. We track it in our payroll system to make sure that we have those records available to us. The other thing as well, you mentioned that you had 2 bobtail thefts in your career. We're actually continuously looking for ways to upgrade our DOT plan. For example, this year I think we're adding cameras to all of our facilities to just further enhance those security measures. So that's just kind of a quick synopsis of how we utilize it here.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I actually have another story from a client that had an employee that they parted ways with for whatever reason, and all of a sudden whoever was taking over that vehicle or driving that truck on the day-to-day would fill it every evening before they left to go home. That employee, the new employee, came back, got in the truck in the morning and noticed the truck was empty or down a great deal of fuel compared to the night before. So he asked, had somebody used the truck in the middle of the night for an emergency call or something of that nature? And the answer was no calls had come in. And when they went to their surveillance or their camera monitoring system, they noticed that the employee that they'd parted ways with, of course, knew the passcodes because they hadn't updated them or changed them since the departure of that employee leaving the company. And that employee had come in the middle of the night, grabbed the truck, knew where the keys were, went and made some deliveries, and then parked the truck back in the same spot and put the keys back. And if it hadn't been for that camera monitoring system, they never would have known that that's what happened. So needless to say, that individual was prosecuted. But I know these stories sound outlandish, but they happen. They take place out there. And then the other thing that I wanted to just point out to everybody, a lot of people aren't familiar with what the Code of Federal Regulation is. This is an example of that book right here. And this is a government manual that goes over all the different things that I just talked about and much, much, much more. So if you wanted to brush up on some of these things, you can by all means get a copy of that for your office. And of course, it'll help you navigate these waters when it comes to what the Department of Transportation is looking for. Any questions?
So a couple have come in. The first one is, can you repeat the intervals on the training again?
Oh, sure. Great question. So the training is required within 90 days of employment or any time a job function changes. So for example, if a customer representative decided to go become a bobtail driver, then they would have to be trained immediately on that standard. And then it's also recurrent training is required every 3 years or 36 months.
Great. And the next one is, you mentioned that the employee is required to keep documentation of the training, but the employer is too.
Yes, great question. So the employee, of course, is going to have that wallet card, and then also the employer has to document or keep that documentation. And I can actually read you the mandate right now. It says each HAZMAT employer must create and retain a record of current training of each HAZMAT employee, inclusive in the preceding 3 years, for as long as that employee is employed by the employer as a HAZMAT employee and for 90 days thereafter. So even after an employee leaves you, you still have to keep that record of their HAZMAT training for another 90 days. Good question.
Great. So it looks like that's all the questions that we got. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you guys wanted to wrap up with, but.
Yeah, so obviously my contact information is right here on the screen. So if anybody has any further questions, there's my email address. That's also my cell number. So by all means, don't hesitate, reach out if we can be of assistance on anything related to the propane industry or of course, DOT security plans.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.